we're considering progress in knowledge and understanding over time in relation to benefits management. What's been the progress over the first 25 years and what are the prospects for the next 25? So our next slide is on terminology. And organisations will vary on which terms they use, the meaning which is given to those terms, and also how they relate to each other. A key point is that the term benefit may not actually be used. So for example, for a long time I worked in managing regeneration programs before I became a lecturer, before I became an academic. In those programs we had projects which were delivering outputs which contributed to outcome targets at the program level. We didn't really use the term benefits very much, but however I recognized when I found out about benefits management that my work was essentially concerned with that. A couple of points on terminology as well. You'll see on the screen we've got benefits management and we've got benefits realization management. Often those two terms are used synonymously, but sometimes the definitions do have some differences between them, as we'll see on our next slide. Some definitions. Firstly, definition of benefit from the APM body of knowledge, a brief one, positive and measurable impact of change. In terms of the elaboration on that brief definition, that needs to be contributing to objectives, to goals, in an organizational context. And then benefits management, again a definition from the APM body of knowledge, looking effectively at a benefits life cycle, starting with identification and then up to the realization of business benefits. A definition of benefits realization management, perhaps demonstrating the differences perhaps in definitions that I referred to earlier. One here from Gerald Bradley, one of those who's been with benefits realization management over the full 25 years. The process of organising and managing so that potential benefits are actually achieved. So it's looking at investments in change and how can that potential be achieved. Benefits realization management is a key part of that.
And then the last one here is the benefits realization approach, as was introduced in the information paradox that was first published in 1998. The key thing here is this says it's a business-oriented framework supported by a set of processes, techniques, which enables organizations to select and manage a portfolio of programs. It deals with P3M, but it's more than P3M, and I'll cover that a little in a couple more slides. So that was the benefits realization approach then.
Much of the webinar today emanates from an article which John and myself, together with our other co-authors, Steve Jenner and Carlos Serra, published in the International Journal of Project Management last year. We were using a theoretical lens of translation because we felt that that was a good way of explaining the spread of benefits management and some of those issues which prevent it spreading, the barriers to its adoption and embedding. So when we think about the term translation in an everyday sense, it's about perhaps translating from one language to another. But in management theory, translation is given quite a specific meaning in relation to the processes by which management ideas spread and influence management practice. And translation is contrasted, with the term diffusion, because it emphasizes changes which occur to those management ideas in that process. And so, as that idea spreads from individual to individual, from organization to organization, it's contextualized into, the situation that those individuals and organizations find themselves. And that process involves both actors, people, so that might be the consultants, the educators, the champions for benefits who are involved in that process, and also objects, guidance and other forms of documentation. So, for example, for benefits management, we know that one of the particularly influential documents has been managing successful programs in a UK context. So in our article, we developed a layers and stages model of the development of benefits management over the first 25 years. The idea being that although you can identify some distinct stages, that effectively they build on each other, so that it's additional layers being added. The first, the genesis of benefits management, late 80s, early 1990s, was associated with consultants, business-orientated university departments who identified that there were issues there with particularly with IT, and the IT programs weren't delivering the benefits expected of them, and that the existing investment tools didn't seem to help adequately in relation to that. So they pioneered different techniques which all had that commonality of being focused on benefits at that time, although they were perhaps working quite independently of one another, those original pioneers. The next stage in our model is when that early work became incorporated into government guidance and professional body guidance. And that's in two areas really, in terms of project management, but also in relation to information systems and information technology. The next stage, from the mid-2000s, as organizations would be expected to be using benefits management, was about assessing how well that was actually happening. So there were maturity models which were developed, various networks such as the APM Benefits Management SIG, which were effectively promoting benefits management and trying to increase the maturity of organizations. And then the final stage we've seen is where we start to get specific accreditation in benefits management itself. So we have the APNG International Foundation and Practitioner Certificates, for example, which were introduced in 2012 and 2013. And an existing area, perhaps for potential development of benefits management in the future, is the extent to which it's incorporated into the training that future practitioners get, in undertaking degree courses. So that's a sort of a brief summary of that model, and of course John has been involved, throughout those 25 years. So I'll pass over to him for perhaps some personal reflections on that model.
Yeah, let me just talk a bit about my journey through this. I started working with IT in 1963 at a very young age, I'm sure you can guess. And in 1988, my focus had been on delivering technology. I programmed and did systems programming and helped with a systems engineer, but it was all really focused on delivering the technology. Then in 1988, I was helping DMR then, which became Fujitsu, develop a new strategic planning methodology, and heard a gentleman called Michael Scott Morton present what was called the MIT 90s framework, which basically said that it wasn't just technology, it also involved the organizational strategy, the organizational structure and processes, and the people's roles within it. And we actually totally revamped the strategic planning then to say we're really talking about IT-enabled change, not just delivering technology. And that then evolved into a bigger set of methodologies that said, wait a minute, why are we doing this change? We're doing this change to get benefits. So we actually then developed a benefits methodology, and we worked on that a few years, and then we wrote a book, The Information Paradox, about the use of that technology, which set up the benefits realization approach. Since then, in 2003, we've set a new version of the book where we added the fact that benefits mindset needs to infiltrate strategy and architecture and change management and operations, as well as P3M. So it goes beyond there. In 2005, working with ISACA, I led the development of the ValIT framework, which deals with this. And I then got involved with the Innovation Value Institute, which had a benefit assessment and realization module, which we turned into a business value management module. and I've been involved also with APM, and I'm now the Institute for Digital Transformation and the Value Selling and Realization Council. So that's my journey through this.
Now we're going to move on to just review briefly some of the evidence that benefits management works. What we've got referred to here is some recent studies, and those come from academia. For example, one of John and my co-authors, Carlos Serra, with Martin Kunk, who published an exhaustive study into benefits realization management practices in the UK, the USA and Brazil, and identified that those practices were positive predictors to project success. We've also got similar messages from the PMI's Pulse of the Profession report from 2016, and then a slightly older study from Gartner. So we've got academic studies, we've got professional bodies, we've got management consultancies, all saying that benefits management works. And this isn't new. There are many earlier studies as well that have been making these points. So the first reference there, is back in 2002. For managing IT from an investment perspective, is actually you can quantify the degree to which that is advantageous. And then a second reference there is to another academic study from John Ward, one of again the key individuals in the development of benefits management, together with co-authors, that if you're going to be successful in delivering benefits, then you're going to have a comprehensive approach to managing those benefits. And then another source that's from sort of the IT field from 2008, which again has a similar message. Okay, so there's lots of evidence that we could compare those results against. One area where the APM Benefits Management SIG has been active is undertaking surveys of SIG members and asking them some questions which relate to this area. The numbers are quite small here, about 50 respondents each time we've run this survey. In terms of these results you see on the screen, so firstly we are asked if benefits management is relevant to the key challenges facing organisations in using project, programme and portfolio management. So there's a consistently high percentage there in both years. But there's a different story in terms of whether benefits management fits easily into the way that organisations undertake project, programme and portfolio management. So 2015 in particular, only 31% found that it fits easily or very easily. Again, quite low percentages in terms of the degree to which there's a consensus in the organisation that benefits management should be an integral part of P3M. So, only around 40% indicated there was a consensus throughout or in most parts of the organisation. However, in terms of whether benefits management is of use in improving the contribution of P3M to organisational goals, quite a high response rate there in both years in terms of whether it's very useful or of some use. And then we also asked, beyond the P3M arena, thinking about organisations as a whole, whether there is a strong or a very strong benefits focus in the wider approach to management in an organisation. And here again, the results were low, and they were lower than whether there was a consensus, that benefits management should be an integral part of P3M.
Yeah, and I just want to chip in here and just talk about that last question, because I think that's the tipping point we're at. There are a lot of people out there at the practitioner level who understand benefits management and know what to do, and there are frameworks and methods. But as I mentioned earlier, it has to go beyond P3M. It has to go into the overall management of the organization, starting with strategy and ending in operations. And we're really seeing very difficult to make that jump.
Okay, so again, there are lots of different studies that we might draw upon in order to comment on this area. One study which perhaps is particularly interesting is one which was undertaken a few years ago now, but it was in advance of the introduction of benefits management for IT investments in Norwegian municipalities. So there was a central government drive, a requirement to account for IT investments in such a manner. So this research was done with managers in advance of that happening. So, the question was, what are the issues which would facilitate the adoption and the implementation of benefits management in that context? So there are some answers here you can see in terms of the factors, the ease of use, straightforward results, clarity of goals, clear responsibilities, interprofessional cooperation, perhaps particularly here in relation to, from the IT side, the link in with the wider organisational context. These are people perhaps not necessarily with a great knowledge of benefits management, so this will be indicating, what are they looking for. So there's a clear focus there on things which are easy to use, which give straightforward results. And there were particular issues which were perceived to influence whether benefits management would actually be taken on board. In terms of cultivation in organisational culture towards management, that was also seen in different lights, perhaps different drivers for that to happen. So one might be a politics driver, if benefits management was particularly aligned to political goals and objectives. Another driver for an organisational culture towards benefits management would be perhaps budget driven. So if it was seen as an aid in order to enable organisations to reduce costs, and then a final way in which organisational culture might move towards benefits management was perhaps a professions driven, maybe pure how can we do our job better, and perhaps with a long-term focus. There's also a concern about organising the benefits management process. So this was all about what are the additional resources which are required. How would this fit in to our existing organisational processes? And of course, from the point of view of people who promote benefits management, we have to be able to show the benefits of using a benefits management approach. And part of then that feeds into the final point there, how to choose appropriate methods and tools. So there's perhaps a trade-off here between tools which are easy to use and tools which are thorough and rigorous. And sometimes that tension is one which is felt throughout the organisation, and in terms of perhaps presenting the results of benefits management up to the senior level, that some of the complexity of that work further down the organisation is perhaps simplified in order to draw it through into decisions that need to be made. Another study here, which is effectively a literature review, so it's looking at lots of different studies which have been concerned with benefits management, but a key finding from this study was that there isn't a huge amount of evidence on the adoption and the effectiveness of benefits management. Factors influencing its adoption would obviously include industry sector, and so we can think about that in two ways. We can think about the contrast between the public sector, the private sector, and the third sector. And often, in the public sector, there is a mandate that comes, within the different hierarchies of government. For example, that Norwegian, example or the gateway process, which originated in the UK and has spread to other parts of the world, which is perhaps conducive to benefits management because it kind of it requires its adoption. I was just discussing with John before we started, whether we felt that in the private sector that there were particular parts of the private sector which were particularly advanced in relation to others, and John's view was that actually it's a mixed picture throughout. There aren't any particular sectors which stand out. In terms of the size of a company, often those exemplars of benefits management are found in large companies, but often the tools can be used in the context of a smaller company, perhaps sort of more efficiently, more easily, more flexibly. Certainly in the public sector, one of the findings of the previous study I referred to was that it was perhaps easier for the larger municipalities to incorporate benefits management, perhaps because they had the resources to do so. And then obviously a key issue there is the scope of IT investments, where there is this focus on the IT side in benefits management, and the tools need to be scalable so they are appropriate to those different levels. So again, from this study and reviewing the literature, factors which will influence the effectiveness of benefits management, clear roles and responsibilities, again harking back to the previous slide, governance structures which enable that cross-boundary collaboration, and we know there are whole areas of management theory which are devoted to the ways in which people can effectively straddle those weak links between different parts of an organisation. And then again, this issue of an organisational culture conducive to benefits management, but as we referred to in relation to the previous slide, that might take different forms.
So I'm going to talk a bit about this now from the practitioner viewpoint. As I said, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years. I probably was doing it intuitively before then, but I didn't call it this. And Aesop many years ago came up with a lovely saying, after all said and done, there's more said than done, and that's what we're trying to deal with here. I mean, I don't know what more to write about this than I've already written. And I'm refocusing, and I'll talk about that a bit. Some of the challenges, Michael Hammer in '93 would have been talking about re-engineering in those days. Those of you who remember that. But coming up with the ideas is easy. Everyone has great ideas, but getting things done is the tough part. The reforms die down in the trenches. They just don't happen. Kenneth Galbraith, the Canadian economist, did a bit of a tout for Canada, faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving that there's no need to do so, but this should say there is no need to do so, almost everyone gets busy on the proof. That's the departmental issue. The amount of departmental effort that goes in convincing the executive they don't need to do this could have been spent much more productively doing it, but that's not what happens in many organizations. We need to evolve from a technology. I was going to come back to Richard's point about large organizations have the resources to do this, whereas small ones don't. But large organizations don't sometimes have the mindset to understand why they're doing it. So it can be very much a tick box exercise, whereas small organizations may not have the resources to do it very rigorously, but they have the mindset. They can have the mindset that value is important, and they can make it happen more quickly. So it's not the difference between large and small organizations is not so prominent as that. And if you want to, there is a paper I wrote with APM a few years ago, which had a much nicer name, but they changed it to Winning Hearts and Minds. And it's about how do you get the business to understand that this is something they have to get engaged and involved with, and that's the challenge I mentioned as the tipping point before. So it's not, and I think I alluded to this, it's not a lack of books, articles, frameworks, methods, techniques, or tools. There are a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there. You may not all be aware of it, but there are tremendous. I mentioned Val IT. I mentioned the stuff. There's a lot of material from PMI. There's material from what was, what's it called? Excellent. I mean, there's no shortage of material out there. In fact, Richard and I are writing a paper together with some colleagues for PMI, and they sent their document. I've got a pile about 2 foot of documentation on my floor, which includes this stuff, so it's there. The challenge is what a guy called Pfeffer and Sutton in 2000 wrote a book called The Knowing Doing Gap, and it's people knowing that they need to do it, but not believing not actually getting on and doing it. They talk about, as I mentioned earlier, organizations where they're doing something perfectly in one department and everyone should be doing it, but they've all got the reasons not to do it. So everyone knows stuff needs to be done, but it doesn't happen. And years ago at an APM, one of the APM annual forums, there was a professor from Bristol University whose name escapes me. And he said, and I was in the audience and I'd spoken before, he said, John, I love your book, I use it, but it's one thing you got wrong. This isn't about process, and it's about changing people's behavior, and it's about mindsets. And that was another aha moment for me. You don't change a behavior or a mindset with a process. You have to go through a change management process. And we need to change the mindset from a delivery mindset to a value mindset, from the boardroom to the front line. And that's the core of the challenge. We have all the materials and we know what we need to do. We don't have that willingness to pick it up on the business side. And it's only going to get more significant of an issue as we move into the digital era now, because technology is embedded in everything we do, and it's creating much greater expectations, while in many cases requiring even more significant changes to behavior. And those norms, if they have to be changed, if those expectations have been met, in a very complex sort of ecosystem we live in now. So it's a very different environment we're moving into, one where it's going to be much more critical to get this right. But we're going to have to do it in a slightly different way. And I'll mention it a bit on the next slide, but there's a tendency to bureaucratize this stuff. And I think particularly in large public sector organizations, they tend to bureaucratize it, but that doesn't actually make it effective. You've got to realize what the intent of it is. I was working with one organization, anyone who's familiar with the book, we suggested introducing an organizational entity called the Value Management Office, who would help organizations put together their business cases and review them for the board so that nothing went forward that really shouldn't be looked at. And in one organization, I discovered that they were sending these business cases back 20 to 30 times to the people making them. And it wasn't because it was about dotting I's and crossing T's. It had become overly bureaucratic. So you've got to realize you're there to, this is something that helps people. It can't be something that they see as getting in their way. I mentioned before, and I think it's important to realize that benefits management goes beyond project management and beyond program and portfolio management. It's an organizational mind shift focus, focusing on creating and sustaining value. And in doing so, it can very much threaten and disrupt the power structure of an organization. Many executives have got where they are because they think they're doing the things they've always done. And they don't see why they should change. And they don't see why they shouldn't have the control just to say we're going to do this, rather than have some guys come in and tell them they can't do it. So it's a huge threat to people at that level. So it's essential that before you start, you enlist senior executive sponsorship. You don't have to have the CEO. You can pick, in an organization that's large enough, you can pick another CXO if they want to do it in that department, and you can be successful. And as I mentioned before, then the CEO may take notice, usually when there's a bit of a crunch, and say we should do this everywhere, and sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. But it is, if you don't have an involvement, an active, committed sponsorship at that level, you're going to be pushing rope uphill. You've got to recognize that it is about behavioral change, and it's a significant change management program in and of itself. So you've got to manage the journey, just as you do in a program of change. Where do you think it's realistic to end up? Where are you going to begin? Take an incremental approach, start light with small steps, build on successes, and as I alluded to before, avoid excessive bureaucracy. If that happens, you're just going to piss everybody off, to use a highly technical expression, and they won't participate. And be prepared for a long journey and don't embark alone. I've been on this value benefits journey, well, part of 53 years, but certainly for almost 30 years. And we've certainly made inroads, but there's a long, long way to go, and recognize that. But we need everyone out there to be getting this, and the people in the business leadership who have been reluctant to do so are the key that we have to get to at this point.
From the academic point of view, the adoption and embedding of benefits management throws up a wide variety of different research questions. And so if we can identify the answers to some of these questions, then that can help to feed into the practitioner field that John's been talking about. So some of these questions, and we highlighted this in our article in the International Journal of Project Management, how do organisations first find out about benefits management, and how's the knowledge spread? So John was talking about perhaps you or I as a promoter of benefits management, trying to influence those higher up within the the higher echelons. So is that process successful? Maybe, or is it somebody from the top management side who actually introduces benefits management into the organisation, and then is able then to spread it down the hierarchy perhaps, and ensure that that it's embedded. What are the key factors which determine whether and how benefits management is explicitly used in an organisation? Who makes those decisions? So perhaps case studies of organisations perhaps that get so far and then get stuck at that point, or others which move on and get that kind of consensus across a wider range of different departments, across perhaps the whole organisation, about the importance of benefits management. So what are the factors which determine these different success rates at that stage? How easily does benefits management fit within your approach to project, program, or portfolio management? So we've been talking about benefits management being wider than just that arena, but but it is a key area, and the findings that we've presented, the things that you've been saying, suggest that often there is an issue about how benefits management fits in that approach. So it'd be interesting to build up further evidence about that. And then just in general, how easy do organisations find it to build commitment to benefits management over time? So John was talking about being prepared for a long journey. So some evidence about how long that journey is in practice is going to be valuable. And then the final question there, relationship between organisational culture orientated towards value and the use of benefits management methods and practices. So we've been talking about the importance of organisational culture. Can we build up a base of evidence on that area? So as well as using the questions to to ask us to provide answers to questions that you've got at the moment, if you'd like to work with us, maybe if you have some particular stories from your own organisation that might be appropriate as case studies, perhaps you to be anonymised, we'd be very interested to hear about them and to continue the conversations that we've got with you in that area. Effective implementation of benefits management is driven top-down. The challenge is lack of understanding or commitment at senior management level in influencing positive change with continuous improvement. How do we deal with that question?
If I had the complete answer to that, I would be a very rich man, having been doing this for 20 to 25 years. But there's no substitute to just finding avenues to speak to these people. I mean, one of my more successful assignments in this regard was when I found the CXO who was responsible for IT was going to a conference. I went to a conference with him and had 2 days with him, after which he got me back to come and talk to the rest of the executive. So it's finding avenues to speak with those people. I mean, if you're at a senior level enough or they're approachable enough, it's taking them to lunch and talking to them about it. I'd like to say, to drag them off to conferences, but they don't tend to do that. So it is building a trusted relationship with those people, speaking their language. Don't get into the techie nonsense. I mean, keep it simple. Now, one of the keys of the information paradox was the concept of the 4 R's. Are we doing the right things? Are we doing them the right way? Are we getting them done well? And are we getting the benefits? That's a great way to start a conversation with an executive. I did that with an executive years ago, and he said, "We're doing the right things? Yes. Are we doing them the right way? Yes. Are we getting them done well? Yes. Are we getting the benefits? Shit, back to question number 1. So when you have those conversations, they do get engaged. Sustaining that engagement is another question which Richard mentioned before.
Is there any published data that demonstrates the value of benefits management in monetary terms for certain industries or project/programs? For example, we believe or can prove we saved certain numbers of millions of pounds by introducing a benefits management approach or culture. Perhaps I'll start off in addressing that one, because when we undertake research into any kind of area, often we would be skeptical of claims which indicated that a certain amount of money had been saved through undertaking a particular management tool. And it's also one of the features of benefits management that there's no single point at which you can define the benefits and say everything's kind of like stopped here, because often the key point, particularly if change is being undertaken through projects and programs, is that benefits will only start to accrue when you get those change programs incorporated into the mainstream activity of the organisation. So one of the points I think I would make is that we need detailed studies which take into account a wide variety of different factors, both quantitative and qualitative factors, in order to truly assess the value of benefits management. Having said that, and I'm not quite sure at what point this question came in relation to the presentation, but when we summarised some of the pieces of evidence, some of those pieces of evidence were actually referring in monetary terms to the benefits from benefits and value management.
It's always a tough area. When I was working with ISACA developing VAL-IT, we actually had a piece of research with, shouldn't tell Richard this, but with the University of Antwerp Management School to look at the relationship between benefits achieved and the use of benefits management practices. What we found was that because the use of benefits management practices was so early, the things most people weren't doing was they never bothered to manage them afterwards. They held very few people accountable and they didn't manage them. And unless you have a sustained period of measurement, it's very difficult to prove. There are a lot of practitioner stories, individual client stories, but not really rigid research that would qualify that. I would say that from a practitioner point of view, if you look at some of the Gardner stuff, it's pretty specific about the numbers, but we've got a lot of work to do there.
I found the point regarding benefits management disrupting power structures in organisations interesting. Do you have any more insights on this to share, and or are you planning any more research on this?
Again, anonymously, but before and preceding the financial crisis, there was a fairly large financial institution in Europe who one department had done this, and heading into this, the CEO said, no, we need all to do this, and the shenanigans that the other divisions went through, so saying they wouldn't do it, was just extraordinary. And by the way, that financial institution suffered tremendously through that period. It is just, it's a bit of the boys' club at that level that no one wants to I remember when I introduced this to one board, they said, we're not going to have to say no to anything, are we? Well, yes, you are, but you've got to do it in a reasoned and logical way. So it is perceived as treading on some executives' patches. You're telling me I can't do things. I've been around long enough. I know I can do it. And you've really got to get some discipline into the process. And if the CEO doesn't do it, you're whistling Dixie. It's a huge change that has to occur.
I think maybe to add to that point, do you plan any more research on this? Yeah, I mean, I think within the the range of questions which I referred to in the third slide from the end, I think, disrupting power structures is something which the adoption and embedding of benefits management may well do. And so in those stories, in those case studies, it'll be interesting to see how much comes out on that.
I think that what may help us here is as we are moving into this new digital world, and in fact I'm speaking tomorrow about the need to rethink governance and leadership in a digital world, because we're still really running factories, and we're really now in a knowledge world. So I think that there'll be more threats to the current power structure as we move into the digital world, and that may open up opportunities to do this. But it will also require that we do it in an agile and flexible way, because it won't tolerate huge bureaucratic involvement. So I think we have a window and a necessity as we move into this digital era.
Prince 2 requires the business case to include sections on expected benefits and disbenefits, and provides for benefits management strategy. How does your topic today relate to the Prince 2 tools and techniques on benefits management? You didn't mention Prince 2. So yeah, I think obviously they will fit in with that approach in Prince 2, and I suppose perhaps what I would say is that in relation to the point about the translation of management ideas, that every organisation will take the Prince 2 approach and will incorporate it in its own way into its own processes. And so there's maybe a degree of choice for that organisation on the bits that it picks out of Prince 2 to really focus on. So having something in a manual, in a document, an object in translation terms is one thing, but actually how that translates into practice in an organisation, is something which will vary from organisation to organisation, and which has to be, examined on a case-by-case basis.